and record this because I've promised a few people uh, the recording. So, why I decided to go to Egypt. Um, well, to start out with, Egypt wasn't on my radar at first. I had been thinking about traveling from about June onwards. I wanted to see what it was like. You know, traveling right now is very personal, and traveling in general is personal to me. I've been traveling my whole life. So I wanted to get back out there. I wanted to report back to people and say, this is what it was like. But Egypt didn't cross my mind. My thought was maybe I'll go to Mexico, maybe I'll go to California or Seattle, or I will drive up to Rhode Island and or Massachusetts or Maine. Going so far abroad didn't cross my mind until a friend of mine mentioned that she was going to Egypt. And I knew already from other friends who'd been traveling that African countries were opening to American citizens or American travelers. Kenya has opened, Tanzania has opened, South Africa, Botswana, Zimbabwe. They're all open and accepting of foreign travelers with a negative COVID test, and then possibly, depending on the destination, rapid tests while you're there or PCR tests while you're there. Some tour operators have different things in place. So a lot of restrictions, but a lot of opportunity if the desire to travel is there. And I had that desire to travel. So when my friend mentioned that she was looking at Egypt for her family, kind of got the wheels turning in my head. That's an option. So I reached out to Ashish Singh Rajka. He is the president of Big Five Tours and Expeditions, a Largay preferred partner, a Virtuoso preferred tour operator. And I said, what's it going to take? And as it turns out, Ashish was planning on traveling to Egypt himself. So he said, look, I'm going to try to get a few other travel advisors to go. We'll turn it into a FAM trip, a familiarization trip. And we were off and running. I very spontaneously booked my flights. I did not consult with Ashish on my flights. I went ahead and booked them, and I made two mistakes in that. One, I didn't talk to Ashish and say, how many nights would you recommend? And two, I didn't really consider the fact that I booked my flight out on a Monday. This is important because COVID testing for Egypt requires that you have a negative COVID test between 96 and 72 hours, within 96 or 72 hours prior to your departure. This is not the departure from your hometown unless you have a nonstop from your hometown to Cairo. This is the departure of your final flight that lands in Cairo. I can see there's a glare on my glasses, so we'll take that off. So as it stands, what I ended up having to do was fly on Monday, arrive in Paris on Tuesday morning, connect in Paris to Cairo Tuesday afternoon, which was a full 25 hours after I left my hometown. So I needed my test results Monday morning printed in my hand before I went to the airport. And had I stopped and thought about it when I booked my flights, I think it would have been different. I like to say I'm my own worst travel advisor. I would never do this for a client. This was definitely me not just kind of spontaneously booking. The 96 versus 72 depends on where that final flight comes from. There's a few airports on the 96-hour list. North American airports are on that 96-hour list. So for example, a nonstop out of JFK or Toronto, I don't know if that's an option, but a nonstop out of a North American airport, a flight out of Paris, a flight out of Frankfurt, Germany, London Heathrow, and then there's a couple Asian airports on that list. These are airports where the transfer time is very long. And then obviously for people connecting in Europe, could potentially be coming out of LA or like me from Atlanta. There's even JFK to wherever. So that I got very lucky with Paris being on the 96-hour list. I'm fully admitting this. I didn't look it up originally. I'm thinking, oh, I'm from North America, so I have 96 hours from my Monday flight. It was not. It was 96 hours from my Tuesday afternoon out of Paris flight. In terms of information received from Delta once I had booked everything, I got quite a bit. I I booked through the Largate Travel Air Department, which is how I do all of my client travel. Um, but I'm also a Delta Silver Medallion. So my frequent flyer number is in my profile within Sabre. My email address is connected to that. My global entry is connected to that. So Delta sent me all the information. I must have had 4 or 5 emails a week from Delta talking about click here for destination information, click here for our updated care standards, click here for this, for that, all of it. That was, let's see, go back to that. That was great. It really helped me see that Delta's taking this seriously. They're blocking middle seats. They're very strict with masks. I saw this in the Sky Club in Atlanta. They were walking around with masks, offering them to people who were not wearing them. They were reminding people that you could only take your mask off if you were actively eating or drinking. They've really, I feel like Delta's definitely on the ball with it. One of the things in their email was click here for destination information. Well, I clicked on that link, but because Delta doesn't fly into Cairo, they do with their partner Air France or with KLM, Egypt wasn't actually on Delta's website as a destination where you could get their updated COVID information. Where I got my updated COVID information for Egypt was through the State Department, through the Egyptian Embassy, and through Big Five. So that was how I knew the 96-hour mark that I needed. This was how I knew what to expect on arrival into Cairo. And because I was working with Air France and Delta, also what I could expect in the travel process itself. So COVID testing, if anyone has done it, it really depends on where you are, I'm going to say. I know that everyone that I traveled with had a different experience in getting a COVID test and getting a result. Some places require an appointment. You can't walk in. Some places won't allow you to make an appointment. It's a drive-through clinic only. And when you get there, you get there. And if you want the test, you sit in the drive-through line. Some places are private labs and, you can get something pretty quickly. I had clients go to Tahiti out of LA back in September, and they were able to pay to rush the results. I had no such option. I'm in a small town in Pennsylvania, and I'll go back to this video here. I'm in a small town in Pennsylvania, and I know from fellow advisors in the area that there's almost nowhere to get a test, and nobody that I spoke to would guarantee results within 72 hours. I was also traveling out on a Monday, and I needed the results printed. So it all worked out. Everything was perfectly fine. I had no issues at all, but I'm a worrier. I will take on a client's worry. I will take on a fellow travel advisor's worry. I personally stressed myself out through this. I did get the results in time, and I'm going to show you what I got. My results, I took 3 tests. One was a mail-in test that I sent off to a company that guaranteed results in 24 hours. I took it on Friday afternoon. I sent it Friday. They had it Saturday morning, and I had the results by, I want to say, Saturday evening, overnight. I went to the drive-through clinic 20 minutes from my house, 25 minutes from my house, down in Hagerstown, Maryland. I went there on Friday at about noon, which was my 96-hour mark. It was a 2-hour wait in my car. So I took the test at about 2-ish in the afternoon, maybe 2:30. So I took my first COVID test at about the 94-hour mark, which if there were any delays in Paris, that's really cutting it close. However, I got those results overnight into Saturday morning. I got them on what they call My Chart, and I think a lot of people use this. This is what it looks like. There's hardly no information. There's the date and the time down there. There is an MD, but it's so vague. So I took a second one on Saturday morning, and I knew I was getting the results. This hit me at the probably 80, 70 something hour mark. And I felt much more comfortable with that, just knowing that if there was any delay in Paris getting into Cairo, I at least had a buffer time. On Monday morning at 8 a.m., when the medical records opened at the airport, or I'm sorry, at the Hagerstown Hospital, I called them and I said, look, I am leaving in 2 hours to go to the airport, and I need these results printed. And what I pulled from the MyChart portal was not sufficient. So I was able to drive down and pick up a 2-page medical record. I felt much more comfortable with this. I don't know what the Egyptian health officials on arrival in Cairo, if they would have taken that first one. I felt much more comfortable having the full lab results. For this reason, if I go back to Egypt within the next little while and need COVID results, I'm not traveling on a Monday. I'm not going to recommend a client travels on a Monday or a Tuesday. I'm traveling on a Thursday or a Friday, so I have that full week to get the test results. Now, I will say again, everyone has different experiences depending on where you live. If you're in a big city, you probably have access to very quick results. It really does vary. When I arrived in Cairo, I needed to fill out a health declaration and give that to the health officials. And I also needed to show my results. They didn't take the results. They did look at them. They checked the date. They might have checked the time. And they took my temperature. I traveled with 3 other women. One of them was asked for the exact time that she took the test. One of them was asked for proof of health insurance. I wasn't asked for any of that information. It is a requirement that you have health insurance when going to Egypt. And so I took my health insurance card, and I also had travel insurance, and I took screenshots of my my travel insurance policy in case they asked for it. In terms of the actual traveling, in 2018 and 2019, I traveled like once every 6 weeks, maybe less. I traveled a lot. I'm coming out of a small airport in Pennsylvania. I rarely fly out of someplace big like JFK or Dulles. And I will say that really my airport seemed pretty normal to me. The Starbucks was open, Subway was open, Dunkin' Donuts was open. There were people milling around at most of the gates. Atlanta airport seemed fairly busy. I flew into Terminal D and I walked over to Terminal F. And the only place I didn't see a lot of activity was in Terminal E, but in general, that's one of their less populated terminals. And then Paris was very busy. I did fly business class. I got a really good price, and I deemed it safer is not the right word because I have complete confidence in Delta and Air France, but I knew there'd be more space, and I also wanted the bed for the overnight. So I felt completely, perfectly normal, with the exception of not getting a drink when I boarded the plane. Especially for those long hauls, you board almost an hour before takeoff. So they weren't passing out drinks at that point. They waited until we had taken off and were in the air before they came around with a drink service. And my Atlanta to Paris and then the Paris Cairo in and out were with Air France. Air France was offering what I felt was a fully normal meal service. They had glassware. They had a tray with your appetizer and your salad. And then when you were done with your appetizer, they took that little plate, they took it away, and they put your main course down. On my flight from Paris back to Atlanta, Delta only offered your full meal on a tray, no swapping out, and they were only using plastic. And the only thing that I can think here is that it's potentially the difference in US regulations and EU regulations. I It could be something different, but if Delta's not offering glassware, then it must be something that the US regulations are restricting against. They definitely, both airlines were reducing the touch points between the flight attendants and the passengers. And I think that was pretty much across the board. I see a couple of questions here. Business class seat worth it for the bed and the space? Absolutely. So my flight out of Atlanta was at, can't even remember. It was late. And I landed in Paris at about 8:15 in the morning. So I had a nice overnight. That's a 10-hour flight. And then my flight to Cairo took off again in the evening at about 6-ish. And I landed in Cairo 11:30 at night. And then on the return, most flights out of the Middle East leave in overnight hours. They're red-eye flights back into Europe or to the US. So my flight out of Cairo left at 1:45 in the morning, landed in Paris at 5:30, and I had another 5 or 6 hour layover in Paris, and then a 10-hour flight back to Atlanta. So absolutely worth it. The Air France seats are slightly more spacious than the Delta seats, but I was also on an older Delta plane. I've been on the newer ones, and it's slightly wider. You have more of a foot space. The business class cabin was about a third full, maybe. I would say anywhere from 8 to 12 of us on all of those flights. And I know that the rest of the flight was fairly empty as well, probably about a third full. Delta's been blocking middle seats, and they have committed to doing so for quite some time. And I was at the gate, prior to departure, so I got to see everybody. And there was definitely far fewer people milling around than, for example, on my flight in February from Amsterdam to Detroit. A totally different route, but far fewer people than I would expect on a flight like that. On arrival in Cairo, I walked off the plane, and the first people that I met was the health officials. This is who took the health form and the COVID test. And then beyond that was immigration. And before immigration, my meet and greet met me. A meet and greet is someone who will basically help you through immigration with the visas, help get your bags for you. Of course, I traveled carry-on only, so I felt like I had nothing for this guy to do, because I just, everything was right here in my carry-on, and off we went. But went out to the hotel where I met the remainder of my group. Now, my group was 3 other travel advisors, and they had flown in about 3 days before me. They did Cairo. We met up the next morning, and we turned around and we flew to Luxor, where we did 2 nights in Luxor, 2 nights in Aswan. And then when we flew back to Cairo, they actually left. We went and did dinner in the city, but then they were all on the flights out that night, and I had 2 more days in Cairo. So I did everything that they did, but I did it at the end of my trip. That's not necessarily how I would arrange it for a client. The Cairo, Cairo has 2 sides to it. Cairo has the ancient pyramids and the early pyramids and Giza and the Egyptian Museum, which is a fantastic crash course into ancient Egypt. And then it has medieval Cairo and Arab Cairo, the mosques and the citadel and kind of the Arab conquest, 16th century side of Cairo. Of course, it has modern Cairo with Tahrir Square and all of that. So it was what I would recommend, and what I'm going to do the next time I go to Egypt is fly to Cairo, spend 2 days, do ancient Egypt, ancient Cairo, Dashur, Saqqara, Memphis, etc., and then leave, do Luxor and Aswan, and then go back to Cairo and do the more modern medieval Cairo, which is on the eastern side of the Nile. I'm going to keep playing this video as long as everybody is okay with that. It's a few pictures, 2 minutes long. I'm looking at my notes here, just making sure I'm covering everything I want to cover. So I arrived. I'm going to touch slightly on the security and the safety of Egypt. I felt perfectly safe. I knew, I've been to Istanbul, and I knew that I expected that Cairo was very similar. And I knew that I would need to go through security checkpoints at places like hotels, at places like airports. Not quite the way we do it here. For example, when you go to the airport in Cairo, in order to even get into the airport, you go through a metal detector and your bags go through an X-ray machine. It's the same way at the hotels. We stayed at the Four Seasons First Residence, which is on the Giza side, and then in Luxor at the Sofitel Winter Palace, and in Aswan at the Sofitel Legend Old Cataract. All three of these hotels had metal detectors. They had X-ray machines for any bags, purses, backpacks. So when you came back from your day of sightseeing, you put your little bag on and you go through. On the other side of the metal detector, from a health perspective, they were taking our temperatures and they had hand sanitizer for us. One of the hotels even had a mat that we stood on so that we could sanitize the bottoms of our shoes. I felt perfectly safe the entire time. I will say we did have a bodyguard. I know I see Kelly's comment here. She wants to hear more about the bodyguard. She was on my 6 o'clock 6 o'clock show as well. The bodyguard is something that, as far as I can tell, and I was told this by our Egyptologist, it's something that was negotiated by the Americans at some point for American travelers into Egypt. It's not really a bodyguard. He did have a gun, but they are dressed in, they're police officers, really is what they are by background, but they work for the tourism authority. And these men were in suits. They had their gun on their hips. They looked more like detectives, what we would think of, from like CSI or something. They didn't flash any badges or anything, but they rode in the front seat of our van next to the driver, and they were with us for everything. When we got out and walked through the temples, they were there with us. So the driver wasn't, he stayed with the van, but the bodyguard, the police officer came with us into everything. When it was the group, when it was the four of us and our Egyptologist, he didn't necessarily come with us. I think it depended on who it was, because we definitely had multiple ones. We had one in Luxor, we had one in Aswan, and then we had one I had two different ones in Cairo. So they were with us when it was the four of us and our Egyptologist. They hung back. They might sit at the entrance to the like at the Valley of the Kings. There's a little cafe where guides can sit while their travelers are inside the tombs, and they would just hang out there. He might, if we started walking a little further up, he might follow us and hang back, but I think at that point they realized that you're within a fairly secure place. Like, for example, he didn't go into the Egyptian Museum with me. He stayed with the driver. Um, in the market in Aswan, they were with us and they stood outside the shop that we were in. And we actually picked up, I think, three others, which was highly hilarious. Um, I felt perfectly safe. These men were so nice. I actually, through my Egyptologist, was able to talk to the one that was with us on my last day in Cairo. Um, because we got to the Citadel and it was clear that he was seeing people he knew. So we talked to him and we found out that actually bachelor police officers have like bunk houses at the Citadel. So I asked, well, I think I'm getting off track here, but I asked him, does this mean that he's a single man and this is where he lives? But if he gets married and moves to an apartment in Cairo, does he get to live there? It turns out that he's actually from a small village up near Alexandria and his wife and children live there, but he was assigned to be in Cairo for a certain amount of time. And so when he's in Cairo, he stays at these police barracks. Um, so we had the chance to talk to these guys. They weren't super talkative, but they really were in the background. They would just sort of make sure that you weren't left behind. They would just, they just watched. Um, and I think there was only one point, I think it might have been in Aswan, where we were pulled away while he dealt with this guy, whoever it was, a local who wanted something. There was only one point where these police officers got between us and somebody else. Otherwise, it was like, your friends waiting for you outside the shop while you're doing your shopping. So that's the safety and the security. I've mentioned that the Delta Air France flights. The one thing I want to touch on is that we had two domestic flights in Egypt, one from Cairo to Luxor and then one from Aswan back to Cairo. These were with Egypt Air, and there was no social distancing there at all. Everyone was wearing a mask, and anyone that didn't wear a mask was asked to put one on. People did have them under their nose, like we've seen around here. But the crew on the Egypt Air flights, which are an hour max, maybe an hour and 20 between Aswan and Cairo, they were wearing those Tyvek suits. They had on goggles, they had on masks, they had on face shields. The crew was very, very kitted out. They were passing out water bottles and hand sanitizer when we got on the planes. And then because they're such short flights, nobody was up and moving around. I think maybe a couple people went to the restroom on the plane, but otherwise you take off, you're in the air for 30 minutes and you're practically descending again anyway. So really short hops, and they were full because I expect it was a lot of business travelers, the way people travel in the US for business. I've got 25 minutes left, so I want to run through the itinerary quickly. If there's any questions, again, please feel free to put them in the chat box. You've also all have my email address. You're welcome to follow up with me if you have any specific questions that I don't touch on, and I can stay on a couple minutes afterwards to answer questions as well. Like I've already said, I did overnight in Cairo on that first night, but immediately turned around and flew to Luxor. So to me, this is where my trip started. It was Luxor. My first archaeological site was the Temple of Karnak. This has been on my bucket list for a very long time. I studied it in college, and it's absolutely fascinating. It's one of the largest temples in the world. It is the largest temple in the world. And it's sensational. I really don't have a lot of words for this trip except awesome and amazing and incredible, because if you did follow along with any of my Facebook stories or Instagram stories, or you have read my blog post or anything, you already know that I was blown away by Egypt. From an archaeological site perspective, to just be there in these sites was surreal to me. I've been studying them since college, and they're beautiful. They're so well preserved. Um, but then to actually be walking through them and being able to touch them, um, there's very few sites like this where you can get up close and personal to something that was built so long ago. In Greece, for example, in Athens, you can only get within about 40 feet of the Parthenon. They have barriers up. Stonehenge, you can't touch the stones at Stonehenge. There's so many other places where, in order to preserve them, and I fully get this, in order to preserve them, they block it for a lot of people. We're able to walk through these sites. This is absolutely fantastic. We were some of the only people there. The most people we saw were down in Aswan. We started with the Temple of Karnak. We saw 15, 20 other people that evening. And then at the Temple of Luxor that night in the dark, with these lights illuminating the temple, which was magical. The city, it's in the middle of Luxor. The city is going on around us. You're slightly lower than street level. So sort of above you, you can kind of see the tuk-tuks and the vans driving through. You've got the people on the street selling things. You have this ancient temple in the middle of this bustling city, and yet it's beautifully illuminated. And we had, 10 other people in the temple with us. It's a huge temple. Let's check something. The following morning, we got up early and we headed across to the Valley of the Kings. This is a very long day. When I'm looking at traveling to Egypt again, this day will actually be split into 2 days. This was far too long for us. It's very hot. And we actually didn't see everything that's in the Luxor area. There's so much more in that area. Luxor has almost 1/3 of the world's UNESCO heritage sites. They are everywhere. You have the Valley of the Kings. You have the mortuary temples of various kings and of various pharaohs. You have the Valley of the Queens. You have the world's first artisan village, which is where the Egyptian workers lived when they were building these tombs. You have colossal statues. You have temples, and they're all in this West Bank desert. They're not far from Luxor. At night, from my balcony at the hotel, which overlooked the Nile and overlooked the West Bank, I could see the light show that they have at the mortuary temple of Queen Hatshepsut. It's in the distance, but it was very noticeable. There were these beautiful lights lighting up the desert cliffs. So it really is, it's right there. Giza, for example, is at the edge of, Cairo goes to the Giza plateau. The city ends at the pyramids. So these are not inaccessible. They're not 3 or 4 hours out into the desert. There is one that's like that, and I'll talk about that in a minute. But these really are very doable. We left the hotel in the morning. We jumped on a little boat and we crossed the Nile. Our bus met us on the other side. And within 20 minutes, we were at the Valley of the Kings. That 10-minute boat ride cut off an hour of driving. So we had this full day ahead of us to see King Tut, to see other tombs. We went and we saw the mortuary temple of Queen Hatshepsut. We walked through the Ramesseum and several other temples. We went to an alabaster workshop and we got, I picked up this little carving, this little obelisk, and it's got hieroglyphics on it. So we had these chances to do all of this, and there was nobody else around us. As you can see, I'll restart this video, some of these pictures that were here. This really is what it looked like. We pulled up to the Valley of the Kings parking lot, which in a normal year would be filled with buses from river cruises, from other tourists. and we were the only people. I mean, it was absolutely spectacular. This is the Temple of Luxor at night that I'm showing you. Um, that day, though, was very busy. Again, that's a day that I would split up. There's a couple sites nearby that we didn't get to. There's the Temple of Dendara north of Luxor. We didn't get the chance to do that. Down in Aswan, we didn't get the chance to go to Abu Simbel. This is the one that's 3 hours out into the desert. If you ever have the chance to go to Abu Simbel, absolutely go. It was painstakingly taken apart because it was in danger of being flooded by Lake Nasser, and they moved it a little bit higher into the desert. It still overlooks the Lake Nasser, but it is now safe from potential flooding and lake waters. So from Luxor, we drove to Aswan. This is definitely the best way to do it. There's 2 temples along the way. There is Edfu and Kamombo. They're a couple hours apart, and they're both an hour to 2 hours outside of each respective city. So you jump in the car, you have this long drive to Edfu, you have a shorter-ish drive to Kamombo, and then you have about an hour-ish into Aswan. If you've got more time, say 3 or 4 nights, you can do a river cruise between Luxor and Aswan. This will get you the chance to move a lot slower. You'll see a lot more because you're moving a lot slower. You'll stop at Edfu, you'll stop at Kamombo. You'll stay on the boat in Luxor and you'll do some of the sites in Luxor. You might stay on the boat in Aswan and do something else. And then if you've actually got more time, you can also cruise on Lake Nasser. There are hundreds of archaeological sites that are now under the waters of Lake Nasser. Hundreds of Egyptian temples, tombs, probably Nubian villages. These are the villages in the Nubian desert. That's southern Egypt and northern Sudan. These are gone. The Nubians have moved out. They still live in that area, and they have small villages. Either on the shores of the Nile or down on the shores of Lake Nasser. But if you've got time and you have, you want to take a cruise that will get you out to Abu Simbel or some of the other temples that are on the lake, you can do that as well. We obviously didn't have time for any of that. So we did Kamombo and Edfu. And then in Aswan, we did the Temple of Philae, and we went out to the Aswan High Dam so we could see this dam. This was built in the 1960s by Nasser, and it was an attempt to try and minimize the impacts of the annual Nile floods. There's a lot of modern drama surrounding the dams and the Nile, and I hope that the governments can get it worked out, because it really, if it goes as planned, it's really going to destroy Egypt. The Aswan High Dam, the construction of it again damaged quite a bit of archaeological sites. The Temple of Philae was moved from an island that is now submerged onto the island it's currently on. This is actually in Aswan proper. We took a 5-minute boat ride out to it. Abu Simbel, of course, has been moved up quite a bit into the desert, and there's a few others that are on the shores of Lake Nasser that are where they belong. But if anything were to happen, there might need to be some movement of those. The other thing that we did in Aswan was visit a papyrus institute. This was really cool to see how papyrus is made. Very fascinating. And again, like the alabaster workshop that we had been to, just a more modern look at an ancient practice. I went to the Nubian Museum, which is around the corner from the hotel. And this is where I got to see what Nubia used to be like. We had the chance to go to a Nubian village. It's unfortunately not something this particular one is not one I want to recommend, because it was very much a tourist trap. I believe there are others that are much more traditional, so that you can see the way of life of this, because they are an ancient culture. You can see their way of life. This one was very much a tourist trap. And that's all I'm going to say about it. It was very interesting, but it's not something I'd go back to and not something I'd recommend. But like I said, I believe there's others that could be recommended, but potentially not at this time. The Nubian Museum, though, was a great way to get a glimpse into that traditional lifestyle that they have. And one of the things that we noticed that came up is that in northern Egypt, Cairo, Alexandria, even kind of in Luxor as well, you really see that Middle Eastern, Arab, dark Mediterranean look. Whereas further south in Aswan and then at the Nubian village, you really see the more African, Central African, darker skin, different facial features. You can tell that they're different. They're completely different cultures, and you really can see that. You see the differences as you move further south into Upper Egypt. Okay, 13 minutes. I want to make sure that I have covered everything in Aswan. Yes. Aswan is not a place that I would add more time, I don't think, to a trip. I would definitely give more time in Cairo and Luxor. Because of probably COVID, there's limited flights between Cairo and Luxor and Aswan. So we were very structured in when we could arrive and when we could leave. So our flight out wasn't until the afternoon. So actually on our second day in Aswan, we had the full morning to ourselves. And that's actually the day that I went up to the museum. We flew out. We were back in Cairo before dinner. I would have liked, I think, to try the spa at the Sofitel Legend, especially after having all of the days out walking through the valley. And, I knew the later days to come doing the pyramids were going to be pretty hectic. Right now, with COVID going on, spas really are cutting back on what they offer. So it was just something I didn't look into. In the future, though, the Four Seasons, the Sofitel, and actually probably both places would be great places for a spa treatment. And you really do want that time to slow down and take in your surroundings and, sit there for a second and go, wow, I really am in Egypt. Oh my gosh, I'm sitting on my balcony overlooking the Nile River and another archaeological site, Elephantine Island. That's just fascinating. So when we arrived back in Cairo, my fellow advisors left me and I stayed on. We did a very full day doing Dashur and Saqqara and Memphis and Giza. This really does need to be done in one day for, I think, traffic purposes. The later it gets in the day, the busier the traffic gets. So when I started out, we left at 7 a.m. and we went straight to Dashur, which is the farthest south site. It's about 25 miles south of Cairo. Excuse me. But it's not the earliest site. Saqqara is actually the earliest site, but it's closer in. So what you want to do is go all the way out and do Dashur and then come all the way back. So I'll run this video again on the screen and I'll try to point things out as I see them. So went all the way down to Dashur. This is where I was, because it was just me at this point. It was the only person. It was me, my guide who got out of the van with me and walked over to the entrance of the pyramid, and my bodyguard who stayed 40 feet behind me. We were the only people there. To get into the pyramid, you walk up steps, probably about 20 to 30 feet up is the entrance. When you get into that, your entrance is actually only about, I can't even do this on my screen. The pictures will come up in a second and it'll give you an example. They're about 2.5 feet tall. So when you're walking into the pyramids, you're first of all, you're going down and you're going like this through. Imagine a ramp that has little like pieces of wood so that you can kind of slide and and kind of keep your foot hitting the ramp down, like a gangway or something getting onto a boat, for example. Um, it was wild. And I was the only person there. So I walked all the way down, get into the bottom of it, and then you actually start going up so that when you do get to the top, you're at the top of the pyramid in a chamber that's up there. Um, Incredibly fascinating. So my first pyramid was the red pyramid, and then I went into the bent pyramid, which was the first. This is where I'm showing a few of the pyramids. This is at Saqqara, the stepped pyramid, which was the first attempt at a pyramid. Dashur's bent pyramid is the first attempt at a straight-sided pyramid, like what we see at Giza. But the bent pyramid, they started out, at a weird angle, and they changed it. The red pyramid is the first example of a fully smooth-sided pyramid, and then of course we have the later pyramids at Giza, which are what people think of when they think of the pyramids. But there's actually a lot of pyramids in that area. From Dashur, I went to Memphis and Saqqara, and then ended at Giza. Giza, it's a very interesting site. Like I said, it is right at the edge of the city. It is, you're on this busy street and you pull into the entry. I think we probably sat there for 15 minutes because it was such a bottleneck of getting into the Giza plateau. Our driver dropped us off. We went and got our tickets and went through. Our driver actually was on the other side when I came out of the pyramid, and we were ready to drive around and stop at a couple of other sites. So the cars are able to get in. I had lunch up on the Giza Plateau as well at a new lounge that has this beautiful panoramic view overlooking the pyramids. And it is owned and operated by an Egyptian company who is in the process of building not just one of the new museums, but also a new visitor center and an entirely new experience at the pyramids. So right now, when you drive into the pyramids, again, this bottleneck of cars and trucks. The Marriott Mina Hotel is across the street. It is an old palace. So you have all these people going in. There's a couple of event spaces and other restaurants along up that way as well. So you have all these people trying to go into this site. When this new visitor center opens, it's going to be on the other side of the plateau, and your driver is not going to be allowed in. This is whether you have a private car, a van, or a large bus with, say, river cruise tour guests on it. Everyone will go into this massive parking lot. It's already been built. It's probably very close to opening within the next probably 6 to 8 months. And because I'm a travel advisor and this was a fam trip, I had the chance to go and actually see this. So this was very cool, and I'm actually really excited for it. It's going to change the dynamic of visiting the pyramids, but I think in a good way. It's going to be what American Western travelers have already come to expect from, I guess, more of our sites that we are familiar with. You're going to go into this parking lot. There's one visitor center, one entrance. Everybody goes in. There will be skip the line tickets. There will be VIP access. But everyone will come in here. They're going to have presentation spaces and things like that. And then you walk outside. So you go into this building, security checkpoints, all of that, metal detectors, your bags will go through x-ray machines, things like that. And then you'll go through this big presentation space with probably some gift shops, probably some, well, of course, restrooms, cafes, things like that. And then you'll go out and there will be a hop on, hop off bus there. This bus will go through a route. There'll be 5 stops where you can pick up the bus. If you're on a river cruise, for example, that river cruise company could take one of those buses, charter it. If you have a group of 6 people and you want your own private van, we can arrange that for you. And if you're 2 people and you want a private car, that can be done as well. So there are different levels for people to go and explore the pyramids. The hop on, hop off bus is fantastic. I think it's going to streamline the system, and I'm really excited for it. There's a museum that'll be over that way as well. And then while I was there, I was watching, or I should say, while I was in Cairo at the Egyptian Museum the next day, they're in the process of moving a lot of mummies and artifacts to the new museums. They just had a procession the other day, and they are shifting things around. The Egyptian Museum is a very old, very outdated museum. And so this new museum is now going to be state of the art. And they're very excited about it. And so I think by default, I'm very excited about it. I think it's going to be a really good way to see the sights of Cairo. And they say this is going to bring them into the 21st century and modern architecture and a much more Western feeling than is in a lot of the sites already, which personally I like the non-Western and the early stuff because I think it's really authentic. But I think this is going to be really authentic as well. My final day in Cairo. This was the day that I did the mosques, the Egyptian Museum, Coptic Cairo, so the Church of St. Sergius and Bacchus, and the Hanging Church. It's also the Citadel and then the mosques. And I did the medieval bazaar one evening in Cairo as well. So, like I said earlier, normally what I would suggest would be doing early Cairo at the very beginning, all of everything else, and then coming back and spending more time with medieval Cairo. And the more time you have, the more we could dive into, like, say, the 1950s. And Nasser and Sadat and the Suez Canal takeover and sort of modern Egypt, people who are interested in political science and policy and things could certainly meet with somebody who's in that field as well and see how things are moving along in modern Egypt. One of the girls I met worked for the UN with gender equality, so had a great conversation with her about modern women in Egypt. Lots of opportunity to not just look at what we've all grown up learning about the pharaohs and everything in like a world civ class, but really looking at modern Egypt and how Egypt is moving ahead into the 21st century, like we are. I'm at 8:29. Wow. So that was the day, that was the trip. I'm trying to think, I did a 6:00 one and I'm like, what did I miss in my 6:00 one there? What did I not say in this one that I've already talked about? So if you have any questions, there's a chat box. Go ahead and please put questions in the chat box. But again, you can always ask questions over Facebook or email. You've all got my email. I'm really appreciative of you taking the time tonight to join me. We've got a couple people from all different time zones too. So I'm grateful that you're taking the time out of your evening to hear about my trip. It was fantastic. I know one of the things that the four of us really just kept saying was how epic to be practically the only tourists here, to have these sites to ourselves. From a tourist perspective, fantastic, utterly amazing. You know, to be in King Tut's tomb with nobody else was really the experience of a lifetime. From an industry perspective and wanting to see people traveling, you know, it hurts me to see that it hurts me to see where we're at right now, I guess is what I should say. I know that traveling right now is a very personal choice for anybody. There's a lot of things to weigh up, but my hope in my trip, and what I hope I've accomplished tonight is, really to just say, look, it's doable. It did feel safe. It felt absolutely amazing. There's ways to travel safely, whether you want to go to Egypt or Kenya, Tanzania, um, or anywhere. Jean, thanks a lot. Makes me want to go now. Absolutely. um, it's there's ways to do it safely. Egypt is not the place to DIY a vacation. I know you can backpack through it. I don't want to backpack through Egypt. I felt very comfortable having an Egyptologist with me. I felt very comfortable having a driver, so I didn't need to, figure out how to get an Uber in Cairo and get myself around. Having the police escort, the police officer, again, it was not overbearing. He wasn't, like my mom dragging me out of a store. It was like, he's just there. He's this extra comfort level, I felt like. And it really was amazing. And yeah, if there's any questions, if I've made anyone want to go to Egypt, which I hope so, then I'm here for you whenever that is, whether it's next year or in 5 years. And I've got the supplier partners like Big Five to really make it a dream come true for you. So, because it was a dream come true for me. So yeah, with Kelly, I'm ready to go too. So, all right. Well, we've had a few other people jump off. So ladies, thank you so much for joining me tonight. I'm going to go eat some dinner, and thank you again. And I look forward to talking with you and working with you soon. So have a great night. Thank you.